NIL or revenue share? What's the difference? We're explaining it on today's Overtime with Matt Moscona. So glad to have you aboard with us here. Please take a quick second, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. My name is Matt Moscona. I'm the host of After Further Review on ESPN Radio in Baton Rouge, syndicated all throughout the state of Louisiana. Also the host of Locked On LSU and the publisher at louisianasports.net. And for the last 4 years, I have been I like to say I have my PhD in the understanding of NIL and revenue share. And I know that's a massively confusing topic for a lot of college football fans and college athletic fans in general. And I had some of you ask in the comments if I could maybe take some time to explain in layman's terms the difference between NIL, revenue share, and why you should care more importantly. So I'm going to do that in this episode today. So again, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments below. I appreciate that greatly. Let's start with what happened 4 years ago so I can kind of lay the groundwork. And I'm going to do this at a third grade level, hopefully, so everyone can understand. It's not an insult. It's just so we can understand. When NIL went live 4 years ago, July 1st, 2021, name, image, and likeness. That allowed, in theory, student athletes to be able to profit on their name, image, and likeness. They could do brand deals. They could do endorsements. Well, we know what happened. It wasn't true NIL. It became pay for play. You had collectives that started fundraising and generating lots of revenue, and student athletes were getting paid to play. The deliverables, what they would do for that money, wasn't really relative to the output. For example, if a student athlete got $750,000 in NIL, well, they still had to perform some type of deliverable, but maybe it was an appearance at a sponsored event. Certainly nothing in terms of the financial benefit of what the actual worth was. Coaches didn't like this very much because it created an imbalance. There were the haves and the have-nots, which we've always had in college athletics, but more on that in just a little bit anyway. And so the movement came to move away from NIL as pay for play and to have more of a true NIL and revenue sharing. So I want to explain how my involvement in this happened 4 years ago before we go any further. So I can kind of lay the groundwork for what you might or might not deem as to make me a credible person. So I've done local radio in Baton Rouge since 2003. I started in sports in 2007. The current show that I host, I've hosted for the last 15 years. I produce content daily at scale and have for 2 decades now. And in 2001, when NIL was coming into legislation, there's a company based out of Baton Rouge called Matchpoint. Matchpoint, the objective was to match athletes with brands to do NIL deals. Remember, at the time, there was still a lot of ambiguity, and schools, athletic departments, in many instances, had to keep their hands clean. They couldn't facilitate deals. So a company like Matchpoint, a company could go on their app, a student athlete could go on their app based on their algorithm. They could be matched to say, hey, you would be a good brand deal. Well, one of the founders of Matchpoint is a friend of mine named Jonathan Pixley. And so Pix and I ended up doing a podcast together called Rosters to Riches. Gotta love a pun. And it really was a first of its kind NIL podcast 4 years ago. And because Matchpoint had so much industry credibility, it was very easy for us to get guests on our show. So we had the good fortune to talk to head coaches, athletic directors, heads of collectives, student athletes, boosters. The billionaire booster John Ruiz at Miami was a guest on our show. So as a result of that, we got very deeply rooted in the NIL ecosystem. And so I've had the opportunity just to have a lot of good contacts and gotten information. When Bryce Underwood flipped from LSU to Michigan, I was the one that broke the news that he got a $12 million deal. You've heard no one refute it since. I don't know that I always get credit for it. Not that I need it, but it's just evidence of the fact that I know a lot about this culture and this ecosystem. So over the last 4 years, NIL has ramped up to the degree we've all seen. Collectives have grown. There's been fundraising. Effectively, teams have bought rosters. Now, I have my own personal opinion on that, which probably differs from what many average college football fans think. I'm perfectly fine with it. If this is the middle and most fans fall somewhere here, like they're against NIL, I'm in my backyard. You know what I mean? I feel very strongly that a free market is whatever someone is willing to pay for something. That's true in memorabilia. A Honus Wagner baseball card is a piece of cardboard with a picture on it, but people are willing to pay millions of dollars for it. Why? Because there is a impugned value on that card. Well, if someone's willing to pay someone a lot of money to play college football, then that is their market value. That's how I feel about it. It's not to say you agree or disagree, and that's fine. But understand, when we moved into the House settlement, right, this is a years-long legal matter that led us to this settlement with the NCAA and the House of Representatives. This case against the NCAA has now been settled, and part of the agreement allowed for revenue share. Now, you've heard that term a lot. Now, remember, revenue share is not the same as NIL. So start there. NIL and revenue share are very different things. NIL is name, image, and likeness. In theory, this is a student athlete being able to profit and monetize on their name, image, and likeness. Brand deals, selling autographs, doing endorsements, etc. in its truest form. Revenue share is the athletic department sharing in its revenue with its student athletes. Now, you might say, well, wouldn't that make the student athletes employees? Maybe, but we're not there yet. There have been several instances of student athletes trying to go through the process of unionizing, of making themselves employees. We haven't gotten there yet. But what revenue share does is allows athletic departments to share up to $20.5 million with its student athletes. So follow me, and I don't want to bore you with math or confuse you, but this is a uniform number. It doesn't matter if you're Ohio State or Ohio U, if you're LSU or you're ULM, Florida State or Central Florida. Any school can share up to $20.5 million of its revenue with their student athletes. So this is where it becomes complicated, however. Not every school can do it. And very few athletic departments are actually profitable. This surprises a lot of people when they hear this, but I'm going to go through some of this and explain. I'll use the school that I cover daily and have for 20 plus years, LSU. So in fiscal 2023, LSU did just north of $220 million in revenue. But they spent $221 million in revenue. So LSU 2 years ago lost just over $800,000. They lost money. There's really only about a dozen or so programs on an annual basis that make money. I think the best way I've ever heard this said is Trev Albert, now the athletic director at Texas A&M, who said college athletics does not have a revenue problem. College athletics has a spending problem. And that is very true, because the issue isn't the ability to make money. TV rights deals, ticket sales, seat licensing, merchandising, all of it. College football playoff, conference tournaments, they generate lots of money. The problem is they spend everything, and in many instances more than they make, to be able to be competitive. So, for example, coaches' salaries, facilities, travel budgets, support staff. So LSU, if we'll go back to this example, LSU lost over $800,000 in 2023. Clearly, revenue is not the problem, but look at Kim Mulkey's LSU women's basketball program, one of the most successful women's basketball programs in the country. They lost more than $8 million. And you could say, well, how is that possible? Well, Kim Mulkey makes over $3 million a year. You obviously are going to have support staff. You're going to have recruiting budget. You're going to have travel budget. You're flying private planes. You're staying in nice hotels. All you're going and doing tournaments in the Bahamas. All of those things cost money. And when you're not generating enough revenue, and you can say, well, but they have sold out arenas. They do. But there's no premium seating like suites or ticket licenses, and ticket prices are low, and there aren't enough games. So the math just doesn't work. So these programs operate at a loss. So every athletic department right now, if you want to be competitive, you have to get the best players. We know this. Well, in order to get the best players, you have to be able to spend. So every athletic department is looking at the revenue share, which right now at $20.5 million, they're going, okay, aside from the dozen or so that are making money, every other athletic department is going, how in the world do we find an additional $20.5 million in revenue? Well, there's only two ways to do this. You either make more or you spend less. And the truth is, it's going to be a combination of that, which is why you're seeing a lot of things like support staff members cut. The University of Southern California just recently announced that they've cut several members of their football support staff, including one senior administrator. Why? They're trying to lower their expenses because you have this $20 million expense that's now coming onto the books this year and is never going away and is never going down, because as revenues continue to increase, that percentage of revenue share will continue to increase. So everybody is looking, how can we spend less? You're seeing support staff cut. You're probably going to see things like travel budgets, recruiting budgets cut. The lesser sports, the non-revenue sports, instead of flying to events, might start busing to events. Instead of staying at the Hilton or the Omni, they may start staying at the Embassy Suites or the Holiday Inn. All different ways that athletic departments can save money to lower their expense. And the other side of that, how do we increase revenue? Recently, there was a story about LSU considering jersey patches. Now, you may think that's abhorrent. The point I've made is, look, I mean, LSU's won 3 national championships, 2003, 2007, 2019, here in the modern era. And in all of those games, they had a bowl game patch with a sponsor logo on it. None of us thought anything of it. None of us would think anything of it moving forward. But you've got to find ways to generate new revenue to offset the $20.5 million and rising that you're going to spend every single year. But here's also the caveat. Not every school is going let me say it this way. $20.5 million isn't enough. Let me give you a further illustration. And again, I'll use LSU, and you can use this for whatever school that you follow that might make sense. We recently learned that LSU, the $20.5 million, this is the breakdown of how they're going to spend this. Hat tip to Wilson Alexander at the Advocate in Baton Rouge, who got this information. 75% of LSU's budget is going to football, the revenue share budget, that $20.5 million. Different bucket altogether from NIL. 75% is going to football, 15% to men's basketball, 5% to women's basketball, and then 5% to all other sports. So that's 75% of football. That's $15.375 million. I know there's a lot of numbers, but follow me here, please. Okay. You get $20.5 million, 15.3 of it's going to football. Okay. That's probably not enough to fund your football roster, so you're still going to need NIL and other things. We'll get to that. For men's basketball, the 15% is $3 million, $3.075 million. That could be enough to buy a very competitive basketball roster. Not enough to win at the highest level. My best information is in this most recent season where the SEC dominated basketball. The highest end programs were in the $7-8 million range on their roster in NIL. So $3 million for LSU is not going to get you close to that, but it could make you competitive nationally, a tournament type team, but not a national competitor. Women's basketball at 1.025, that 5%, which means you've got 5%, 1.025 for every other sport on campus. So here's the conundrum. Jay Johnson, LSU baseball. Jay Johnson has won 2 national championships in the last 3 years. If they gave the entire remaining budget to baseball. That's still only $1.025 million. My understanding, LSU spent about $3 million on its most recent baseball roster that won the national championship. That was fifth or sixth in the SEC. You're only going to get a third of that in revenue share, 1.025. That's if you spent the entire 1.025. But then you have Jay Clark, who won a national championship a year ago in gymnastics. And you have Beth Torina in softball. And you have this desire to be competitive in all these sports. There's just not enough revenue share to go around. So how do you offset that number? The real challenge in this new era is how do you create new revenue and true NIL? Because remember, with the House settlement, NIL is still legal, but every single NIL deal that's worth over $600, which is all of them, has to go through a clearinghouse. Deloitte will determine if that deal with that student athlete meets market value. Now, I have my opinion on this because, as I explained earlier, market value is what someone's willing to pay. But that's not how they're looking at this. So let's say hypothetically, I'll give you an example. Michael Van Buren was the starting quarterback at Mississippi State this past season after Blake Shapen was injured. He was a freshman. Van Buren transferred to LSU in the transfer portal to back up Garrett Nussmeier. My information is that he's getting just over $400,000 for the 2025 season to be the backup quarterback at LSU. There is no world in which Deloitte would approve that NIL deal for a backup quarterback. Michael Van Buren doesn't have that value on the open market. But in true NIL, no brand would pay him $450,000 thereabouts, $400,000 to endorse their company. So, will Deloitte nix all of these deals? Will they actually go through? What true NIL value is there for student athletes that brands can sell, that athletic departments can sell? That's one thing to keep in mind. But here's the other wild card. I hope you're following me. This is the other wild card that could change the whole thing. High school NIL. Remember, throughout the NIL era, most every state has passed some type of legislation allowing high school NIL, meaning brands can do deals with high school students, and they're not NCAA athletes yet. So those deals are not beholden to those rules of the House settlement, whereby they would have to go through go through the clearinghouse at Deloitte. Let me say it another way. A school is recruiting an athlete, a 5-star. They could get their collective to do a deal with the high school athlete before he or she signs in order to secure that commitment. And that is independent of revenue share. So I don't believe collectives are going anywhere. I believe collectives are just shifting their focus from paying the current student athletes, roster retention, transfer portal, to now trying to go to the high school athlete to get the 5-star to commit. The real issue then becomes, okay, you get the 5-star to commit, signs, comes to campus. What if he or she leaves after 1 year? And that's where this gets very messy. Now, maybe I should have started with this. Maybe in some respects, I'm burying the lead because we're 19 minutes into this video. And if you've made it this far, thank you. Some of you may be throwing your hands in the air going, this is why I hate this junk. It's so stupid. They're greedy. I disagree with you fundamentally. I think the adults are the greedy ones. As we've seen over the last quarter century, especially, revenues in college athletics go through the roof. And all the adults, the administrators, the coaches have all gotten super rich. The bowl organizers and the student athletes had nothing. And if you try to sell me on a free education, save it. I have no interest in hearing an argument of how a free education somehow is of equal value to what student athletes are bringing to a university that generates untold millions of, or even billions of dollars. So it's not an equitable thing. But the reason why you should care. And again, I probably should have started with this. The reason why you should care as a fan is not because you should care if 18, 19, 20-year-olds are getting a lot of money. That there are 18, 19, 20-year-old musicians and actors and business owners and CEOs and tech companies that start tech companies in their college dorm room and become billionaires. And then there's billionaires and millionaires that are that age that got into crypto. And it's not that that you care what they make. You shouldn't care what they make. You should care if your team can win. That's what we're all in it for. The truth is, no matter what name is on the back of the jersey, we will always, as fans, care more about the name on the front or the name on the helmet, right? And the truth is, in order to win, you've got to get the best players. And there's a different dynamic function now within intercollegiate athletics that's involved in getting the best players. And there is a financial component of it. You can hate it, and that's fine. And you can do the ostrich thing where you bury your head in the sand and you pop up every Saturday in the fall just to watch your team play and you cheer, Cole, poosh, poosh. And that's awesome if that's what you want to do. But if you want to be informed, and some don't, and that's okay. I'm not saying you need to be. I'm not saying you're a better fan or a lesser fan, but some are interested in this topic. And if you want to understand why this is important, it's because the way you have the opportunity to build a roster capable of winning a championship is now within all of this. You've got to win in true NIL. You've got to properly allocate your funds and revenue share, and very likely now have to be competing in high school NIL as well. And none of this is going anywhere. So if you hate it, that's okay. Just understand that your hatred for it isn't going to make it go away. There is no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. There's no putting the genie back in the bottle with all of this conversation. So I hope this helps explain a little bit of the difference between NIL and revenue sharing. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. I'd happily do a follow-up video to answer some of your most common questions, or I'll answer them in the chat. But mostly, I appreciate you for being here with us. As we're converting this channel to Overtime with Matt Moscona, the intention to do a daily video on the most pressing topics in college football. Sometimes on the field, sometimes things like NIL revenue share. And a lot of it, all of it, is going to be what's of most interest to you. So please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let a friend know that if they love college football, they got to be here with us every day on Overtime with Matt Moscona.